Welcome to Heavy on Seahawks production. We are beginning the post Russell Wilson era. I know we have a lot of sad Seahawks fans today, but I have good news. Bring you good news. Hopefully, my new colleague Randy Mueller here, with over 30 years of NFL experience, front office experience, executive extraordinaire. We're so excited to have you with us. So first of all, welcome. How are we doing? How are we holding up on the first day of legal tampering?
I love it. I love the term. I love what it means. And having been a part of maybe not so legal tampering for a long time, I'm glad to see it being legal at this point. So it brings
we're all on the up and up here. We feel like we're doing the right thing. So, Randy, well, let's not pull any punches here. Obviously, the big question on Seahawks fans' minds is what transpired, in your opinion, with this relationship with Russell Wilson that led to their decision to go ahead and say, hey, we're going to make a change here. We're going to make a blockbuster trade in this offseason with the Broncos and start clean.
Well, I think it goes back, Jonathan, and you're right. It's not something that just appeared overnight. I think much like any relationship, it has a shelf life, I guess. And the discourse, the drama, the chaos, the untrusting kind of started a couple of years ago. I mean, we obviously saw last year with Russell and his agent making comments about places he would be okay with going, but couching it as only if the Seahawks wanted to move him on. I just think there was some trust that he eroded over the years, especially the last couple. And we all know what the Seahawks have done with Russell. I just don't think things last forever. And the time had come to where they were going to have to probably put up or shut up with regard to investing in him again with a new contract. And it just made sense that, pulling the plug on it sooner than later probably helps Russell. And I think it helps the Seahawks. The Seahawks needed to rebuild, right? They needed to refocus, maybe not so much rebuild, but definitely retool. And to do that in a time frame that made Russell happy probably wasn't going to happen. Plus, he was the biggest asset that they had that could help along the lines of that retool. So I just think it came time that trust was not what it once was. I think we all change in relationships. Different things become important to us. And this is no different. I just think everybody's agenda really didn't match up as well as they had for 9 or 10 years before that. So I think there comes a time, and in this day and age, we're seeing it around the league with quarterbacks now able to kind of pick and choose their departures and exits and everything else. It's become more the norm, and I think there will be a trend going forward.
For the last year, Randy, we've done our fair share of some trade rumors here on Heavy, and some of the Seahawks fans I know got frustrated with that, felt this was kind of like a media creation. And one of the things that, in terms of the trade rumors before Russ got dealt, and one of the things I realized, I guess, over the last year or two, when this first kind of started to go public, was it seems to be a difference with how Russell Wilson is perceived and how he handles himself in the media and the fans and what he's saying, what Pete Carroll's saying. He was asked about it last offseason, said it was a media creation. He didn't want to feed into that, that sort of thing. Days before the trade, John Schneider meets with the media and says, he has no plans to shop Russell Wilson, quote unquote. Pete Carroll says similar things. So can you help fans understand that's what they were kind of saying, in public, but what was the dynamic with the relationship, do you think, behind the scenes that might have led to obviously there being some tension?
Yeah, I think authenticity matters for sure. And I think what fans see and what we see on the outside isn't necessarily what really is happening behind the scenes. And that's what you're mentioning. I've been a part of many of these relationship type settings in the NFL. And sometimes we all have to take the high road publicly. I think it always benefits everybody. It obviously benefits the Seahawks to not be in a spat of any kind with their best player publicly. That doesn't really suit well. And the same for Russell. I think there was questions of the authenticity of what he was saying, because I think people in his camp were saying different behind the scenes. So I think the relationship had definitely soured. And the reasoning behind it all usually comes back to a source of money. I'll be honest with you. Money seems to dictate everybody's actions per se, whether it's branding or whether it's, just what Russell thought was best for him the long term. He couldn't really say it. He said as recently as last week or 2 weeks ago, that he had hoped to finish his career with the Seahawks and wanted to win here forever and blah, blah, blah. Well, we all knew that he had a no trade clause. And the only way he wasn't going to be a Seahawk was if he checked the box that said, I'm okay with being traded.
Right.
I think the hope is that everybody can move on without slinging too much mud. But there was definitely mudslinging going on behind closed doors for sure.
One of the obvious question moving forward is what the Seahawks are going to do at the quarterback position. Does this move, in your opinion, signal that the Seahawks are taking themselves out of the big money quarterback business because I've seen Deshaun Watson mentioned who would be higher salary there. We see, the new Aaron Rodgers deal making it $50 million plus annually. Is this a signal where the Seahawks are saying we don't want to be in that business and go back to that model of drafting a rookie quarterback, building that Super Bowl roster around that low salary? Or is it they don't want to build around this quarterback and pay this quarterback that money, do you think?
I think it's a little of both, but I do think the factor of paying a quarterback $35 or $40 million makes them nervous. They saw what they had when Russell was on his rookie contract. So I definitely think that money factors in. I don't think they would pay this kind of money for just anybody. Therefore, if there's some turmoil going on behind the scenes, it makes it easy to rationalize that, hey, this isn't worth the $40 million. We're not getting it. So much now with these big contracts, and we've seen it with whether it was Wentz or even with Rodgers, leadership style matters. Accountability matters. All these off the field things matter now. And I think teams are willing to pay for it, but they've got to get the full package of what they're paying for. So it's like a stock, sometimes the momentum carries it a different way than really the nuts and bolts of a company that you might be buying is kind of set up on a sand basis. So again, I don't know all the particulars, but I do know this, that the Seahawks have to retool. They have to refocus. And it's easier to do if you're not committing 35 or 40 million to one guy. And I just don't think the destination, or the path to the same destination is the same as it was a couple of years ago for Seattle. Let's face it, the keys to this deal, Jonathan, are, in my opinion, for Denver, what they get in Russell Wilson. There's some that say what they've got the last year and a half in Seattle isn't, up to par. It's not worth that 35 million. And the other one is what the Seahawks do with these actual picks. Those are the two linchpins for me that decide if this is a good deal for either side. So time will tell on all of that. But I do think Seattle was ready to move on. Let's don't forget, Seattle had to be willing to take, I think it's 26 million in dead money to move him. Right. So there was motivation from the Seahawks to move on from this contract and from this player. So all sides kind of got what they wanted at the end of the day. Now we'll see who can pick up the pieces and make something happen on the other end.
And I'm going to read some of these comments as they come in. Feel free, 12s, as you're hanging out with us, to comment. I know where it's like a little bit of a venting session. Kayla's here saying, just wish he wouldn't have been lied to all this time. Sad to see him go. Hard to see any hope for this season now. But this is a long off season, and we're going to talk about maybe the rebuilding plan going forward. But lots of cap space, lots of draft picks. One of the questions I have is there seems to be kind of a tale of the front office. This is the front office that drafted, Bobby Wagner, Russell Wilson, Richard Sherman, Browner, had some great picks in the middle to late rounds, undrafted guys, Doug Baldwin. But then the last few years have really struggled in whiffing on some of these early round picks. So I know some Seahawks fans are wondering, is this a regime that can still be trusted to rebuild this? How do you obviously know, from being in the league, no one's going to bat, 1,000%, but how do you view this front office and the ability to evaluate talent and bring this team back to being a contender after all these moves here?
Yeah, it's definitely multi-leveled with the analysis of this situation. And just to finish on Kayla's comments, the fact that she felt like the fan base was lied to, these might be some of the same things that the Seahawks front office felt like for the last couple of years that have now come out. So there was some deception that kind of led to this point. So everybody else is kind of catching up now to the fact that there wasn't necessarily authenticity, felt both ways in the decision. So, yeah, I think with regard to what they do going forward, That's a big if. The draft pool this year is not seen as being having a lot of answers going forward. I would say this about the front office, and I don't know John well, but I've sat in the same chair, literally, as John has for a few years. And I could not have made a deal like this with Russell without having a pretty clear picture of what my next move was going to be at the quarterback position. I always thought that their best deal to be made with Russell would be a place like Philadelphia, where a quarterback would come back in return. And I'm not, talking down about Drew Lock, but I don't think Drew Lock is their answer. I don't think they think he's their answer. And so I think a quarterback that brings more options to you in return for Russell Wilson was the way the Seahawks might go. But having said that, I think people trust, and I do too, that John has another plan. I think there's another card in his back pocket that has to drop for this to everybody to say, oh, now it makes sense. Whether that is signing a Mitch Trubisky or a Marcus Mariota or drafting a Kenny Pickett at 9, some other card has to be played for this all to come together and make sense. So I do think the Seahawks front office, and we mentioned it earlier, the picks that they have, these 4 picks that they got, 2 firsts and 2 seconds, are critical. And it puts the spotlight on them, their evaluations, and their process of team building to make these picks stick. And you're right, they've had a inconsistent track record, especially recently, that is going to have to change for this trade to come through. It's a risky move for everybody. And I think most of all for the Seahawks and their people, the risk comes in what happens with these 4 picks.
Randy, maybe you can walk us through. I'm trying to understand myself. Is when John makes this move, John Schneider makes the move to trade to Russ, is there multiple contingency plans where behind door A is potentially they're exploring a Watson trade, behind door B is drafting at number 9, behind door C is, using that 9 pick for a different position and maybe a second round, or using those 2 second round picks to move into the first round, to kind of what the Packers did for, say, Jordan Love? Are all those things on the table as like different options right now, do you think, for the Seahawks? Or is it John has a trump card in his back pocket, like you said, he's got one guy in mind that he sees as the quarterback week 1?
Well, again, I can't speak for John, but having done the job for many years, I don't think I could do it with a bunch of what ifs as being the next step. I think you have to have a clear picture of where you're going with it. And so I would indeed have done all the research already to either know what it's going to take to sign one of these guys or to make a deal for another one somewhere else. I just couldn't go into it. I think you're presenting a case that should have happened a month ago, and maybe it did in the Seahawks building. Yes, all those things come into play, but at this point in the proceedings, the day that legal tampering opens, I'm in action mode right now. I'm not really exploring a bunch of options. I've already done that. So from a timing standpoint, yes, we've got to trust that they do have another card to play. And again, I can just speak for myself. I may have already played that card internally. The public and people sometimes in the building don't even know it. I'll just tell you one quick story. When I was the GM of the Saints a few years ago, we ended up having to commit to a quarterback, and I think I can say this, 2 days before free agency even started. And so I had a plan, and we as a group had planned to do a certain amount of things. And sometimes you have to act early to get, the second and third level ripples that come with it. So we felt like if we jumped on board with a quarterback early when I was in New Orleans, that it would help us sign others and make other moves. And it did. So my point is that if John has this move already in his back pocket, which I'm hoping he does, the level 2 and level 3 repercussions from that move are then going to be in play right now, or start to be in play, so that it all comes together in a timely fashion. It's a Rubik's Cube, as I think we all know. You've got to piece together different sides, different angles with players, with agents, with relationships. It's probably the part I miss the most about the NFL is I love to work all of these things at the same time. Some of us do better when our lives are chaotic. And I was always one of those guys. So I enjoyed that part of it. Maybe John doesn't. I don't know. I know, I worked in San Diego and LA for a front office that didn't love all the chaos, didn't like to be in the middle of all the deals. And that was always frustrating for me because I didn't think we ever did enough. And so I know for a fact that some of these GMs, having grown up with them in the business, they love this, and that's what makes them tick. So we're going to find out what Pete and John have in store. I'm thinking that they have this already planned out in their own mind. We just don't know about it yet.
Yeah, for sure. We've got comments chiming in for some of the Seahawks fans. Size saying essentially that he thinks this is an opportunity for the Seahawks to reload back to 2011 when they were kind of at the peak of their ascension towards eventually winning that Super Bowl a few years later. Randy, you mentioned authenticity. I think you're referring to Russ there. How is Russ perceived, do you think, around the league when you talk to your colleagues and friends around the league and by teammates? I ask you that because I was listening to someone suggest that if Russ was to have a statue built, in front of, it was called CenturyLink team, the Quest CenturyLink, in front of the Seahawks stadium.
Field.
Yeah. Yes, there you go. now Lumen. So the Seahawks doing their best to make as many sponsorship dollars as possible there, but he would be skeptical. This was his theory that a lot of his former teammates would show up, which kind of took me by surprise because, like I said, Russ very polished. Is his popularity among either former teammates or current teammates, or his standing around the league, is it different than how maybe fans might perceive him? Do you think?
I would say yes. I think a lot of teammates have come and gone around Russ, and there seems to be a little bit of a common thread of trust and authenticity for whatever reason. I don't know. I've since he came out of school, haven't spent any time with him at all. I think it matters how you lead teams, and the lack of the lack of what's the word I'm looking for? You can't do it in a way that you seem selfish at all, and people have to believe it. And if there are things that happen, for example, here's one thing that, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Last year on the Monday Night Football game where he put on the production of a workout before the game,
yes.
When he couldn't even throw,
right?
That was seen by a lot of people as attention grabbing, that I want the spotlight, I want the limelight. Right. There has been a little bit of that happen the last year or two, especially. That goes a long ways toward people getting in line behind certain people. Some leaders do it a different way, and I'm not saying there's right or wrong, but hey, we all make decisions and we got to be accountable for them. So those are the kind of things that I don't think helped Russ and his reputation inside his own building. Just my opinion.
That's bad. Yeah, I remember that one kind of went viral when it happened. It was such an odd. On one end, it was like you could see like Russ's intensity. On the other hand, it's just kind of an odd, bizarre.
Why then? Why now? Why in front of all the cameras? He could do this 7 days a week at the facility without all the attention. That probably didn't help him. Along
the shifting gears a little bit, but still in the realm of quarterback, there's been some buzz around the Seahawks. They haven't seen, in terms of the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, they haven't got as much buzz as, say, the Panthers or the Saints as of late. But do you see the Seahawks as a viable landing spot for a Watson trade, or do you think they're going to go more in like the young QB route?
I would be surprised. One, because the assets they acquired from Russ, they can use to kind of retool their whole roster, and they need more than a quarterback. Two, I don't know that they're jumping up and down to commit another 35 or 40 million to any one player. And the third thing is, I just think every environment that considers Deshaun Watson and, hey, let's face it, the baggage that comes with it now, it's a decision made above the football people. It's an ownership decision. It's a perception in the community decision. And I've lived in Seattle a long time. I don't know that Seattle is going to be that welcoming of all that baggage, where other cities might. And I'm not saying that to be critical of anything. I'm just saying those are the decisions that you have to be ready to take a lot of the circus that comes with that, if you're willing to sign off and say everything's okay with Watson and his legal issues. Now, I understand there's no more criminal charges, but there still are 22 civil cases that are pending right now. Right. And a suspension in all likelihood from the league that, in my opinion, could range anywhere from 10 to 17 weeks. So there's a lot of risk involved with with making a deal for Deshaun Watson. But I think for the most part, it's going to be decided above the football level in an organization, if that makes any sense. I think from a football standpoint, it's a no-brainer, right? He's way better than, all but 5 or 6 guys in the league probably.
Right.
But you've got to have an owner willing to brush the baggage aside, and a community, city, that's going to be willing to brush that aside as well and be forgiving of all the things that are coming with him. So I think it'll be hard for the Seahawks to be players in it, just for all those reasons. I think it's a little bit of all of what we talked about.
One of the things I've had trouble wrapping my mind around is the trade value for Deshaun, given everything that's going on. Do you think that the Texans, whether it's the Seahawks or elsewhere, do you think that the Texans will land a similar package to what the Seahawks got for Wilson, or is it going to be less based on some of the factors you just laid out in terms of the off-field stuff that's still going on with the civil suits?
I think they will get more. I think the Russell deal will be the floor for what they're definitely asking for. I think it is risky, but at the same time, there are desperate teams. I mean, let's face it. I think Carolina is desperate. I think New Orleans is desperate. And the fact that they're in the same division and rivals is music to the Texans' ears. As a deal maker, if I can get 2 teams from the same division bidding on the same player, I like my chances of getting a pretty good, haul from that. In Carolina's case, they can say the suspension isn't maybe as important as the next 5 years after that are, because we've got Sam Darnold we can get through this year. We already know that. So they make a deal for the future. I think they're going to always ask to get a discounted deal. I don't think the Texans are going to budge on that. And so I think the Texans are going to get a pretty good haul for Deshaun Watson. And the way it stands now, apparently he's willing to meet with the Saints. He's willing to meet with the Panthers and personally kind of attack all the issues on both sides of the ball, pros and cons. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, it should be very interesting to see kind of how that plays out. Randy, I don't know where you are in terms of the current rookie class and your evaluation, how you see things, but just from a overview level, are there certain quarterbacks, the rookie quarterbacks coming out here, whether it's Willis, whether it's Ritter, whether it's, Kenny Pickett or someone else I didn't mention, do you see any of these guys that could be a fit for what the Seahawks like to do?
I do. I think the decision they have to make is, would we rather have, and let's just pick one. My personal opinion is Kenny Pickett is the one guy for me that I see as an NFL guy going forward, and he's probably going to be ready to play soonest. The Malik Willises, the other guys that get mentioned now, to me, are just projects. I wouldn't think those would fit what the Seahawks want to do. So to go back to my point is, the question is, do the Seahawks see Kenny Pickett as an option for them, or is it a Mariota or a Trubisky or something like that, or both? Hey, I'm always one for, let's make a weakness a strength. Let's sign one of these guys who I think improves our chances right now, but still maybe draft one at 9. But it all depends on how they feel about a particular quarterback. I think the fact that you hear people, analysts, experts all over the country now being all over the place on these quarterbacks. There is not a consensus lane to be picked other than maybe Pickett. That seems to be the most noise of a consistent choice. The other ones, I've heard the Malik Willis, and frankly, I've heard people that love him and people like myself who wouldn't pick him in the first couple rounds. So that's the dilemma. There's just no consensus on these guys. That would make me nervous. If we couldn't agree internally, all of us, and in this case, it's John, it's his scouts, it's Pete, it's the coordinator, all these people, if we can't all agree on one player, we're better off going a different direction rather than forcing a pick like that. So I just think it's going to be hard for everybody in the building to agree on one guy, because I can't even agree on it with my buddies, sitting around BSing. So I just think it's going to be hard. I'd love to see them pick a young quarterback that they can build on a first-year contract, because there's value there. I don't know how they view these guys. And for my money, it's Kenny Pickett or none at all. That's just the way I see it.
Randy, we'll maybe save a minute or two at the very end. I don't know, we're kind of reaching the end of this for quarterback talk, but I did want to get a lot of people. I see Kayla's comment about Bobby Wagner and kind of what happened there. So just as a brief summary, Bobby was heading into the final year of his deal. He's been mentioned before he was released as a potential cap casualty. We wrote about it a few times ourselves. But then came out, I don't know if you saw the tweet last week where he said that he found out kind of from the news media or whatever source, he didn't necessarily say. You spent more time than I can even imagine in the league front offices and doing this sort of thing every off season. Walk fans through that process of the decision that goes into releasing a player, and how is that? Is it a possibility that in that process a player can learn maybe without you giving him the call first, or how does that happen if that is indeed what played out?
Well, it definitely can happen. I've always been a relationship guy, so I probably see it a little different in that Bobby Wagner is obviously an icon for this franchise, and I would have liked to have hoped he would have been in the dialogue the whole time. Maybe the dialogue, and I'm just surmising here, I don't know. I'd be shocked if the Seahawks didn't tell him something along the way. But that being said, was there talk of a salary reduction? Was there some other things that were on the table that maybe led to somebody on the outside saying Bobby Wagner is going to get cut, he's not part of it, when indeed the Seahawks had planned on maybe talking to him about a deal for less? And because this stuff leaked out, then they just decided to cut the cord. My point is there's a lot of exit plans along a windy road when you're talking about either reducing a player of his stature salary or cutting him. So it's a tightrope that you're walking. I think honesty is the best way to go. Just having face-to-face contact, face-to-face relationship, and commentary throughout the process. It's hard. I understand that. But the Seahawks have two young linebackers that they've drafted, and one that played a lot last year, the other one they have high hopes for. So I understand it. I understand what they're doing. You'd like it to be more transparent and everybody be on the same page. Sometimes it doesn't happen, I guess. I don't know. You just got to, I think you've got to treat the people like Bobby Wagner with all the love and respect you can, because and I'm not saying the Seahawks didn't, but somewhere along the way wires got crossed for sure.
Do you, as an executive, worry in that situation when that does happen? Bobby takes to social media, your days before free agency, other players are now chiming in. Does that impact whether, obviously money kind of is at the end of the day, usually what kind of seals the deal, but does that factor into players' decisions, do you think?
Well, I think it can for sure. I think the social media aspect of this all, which is really new the last 5 years or so, really changes your dynamics big time, because you've got to be aware of the perception that's out there as a team leader or as a decision maker. So you've got to take into account, what may happen if you don't use transparency with players and with agents. It can surely come back to bite you. If players who are now free agents see the reaction or the perceived reaction that went with Bobby Wagner's release, that may affect them coming to Seattle in the future. So you've got to watch everything you say. And I think you've got to err on the side of almost over communicating. And therefore there has to be a trust. I think with players nowadays, and you saw it with Russell, now you're seeing it with Bobby, with some of these other players of this status, you've got to have a trust, and they've got to be involved in the dialogue, the decision making. I mean, we saw what happened in Green Bay when Aaron Rodgers wasn't feeling like he was involved. You almost have to have an open door policy. You don't have to do everything that the player is recommending, but they have to feel part of it. They're like the rest of us. We just want to be heard sometimes, right? And so I think that's all part of the process that leads to it. I feel bad that it kind of went sideways with Wagner because there's no reason for it. The kind of career he had should be celebrated every day. It shouldn't be questioned as far as how he exited and who knew what. That's the sad part of it.
Randy, we're going to end here in a minute. Can I ask you two quick hits to get your opinion on that? We're getting some of the, some people are wondering about potential free agent veteran options at quarterback. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on briefly is just the power dynamic between Pete Carroll and John Schneider and how that structure in terms of decisions. There's been criticism in terms of Pete's offense, and I know Russ wasn't necessarily happy with how things went there. So maybe you could walk us through, Eddie, those kind of two topics as we end, and do this again soon.
Well, there's a lot to dive off into there. I'll start with first the veteran free agents as far as quarterbacks go, and I say that with a limited list. I've seen everybody, and when I say something, just want people to know I've looked at the film on all these guys, so this isn't just an off the cuff comment. I've watched Mitch Trubisky, I've watched Marcus Mariota, I've seen Jameis Winston on tape many times over to kind of study it, how we do in the NFL, and I've come back to those three guys as being the best options at quarterback. I think there's a lot of other options for backups. I don't put Teddy Bridgewater in those guys' group. So I think there's three guys that I think people are going to be shocked at the market for a Mitch Trubisky. I know it was mentioned on a call I had earlier with the Giants being in the mix. The Giants are going to be way outbid for Mitch Trubisky. Trust me, Mitch isn't going somewhere as a learning tool for $3 or $4 million. I'll be shocked if this guy doesn't get a deal north of $15 million a year with a chance to earn another 10 in incentives. So I think Mitch, I think Marcus, I think those guys will be options. And I think Jameis is probably going to be in play, maybe for the team that loses out on Deshaun Watson. With regard to the dynamics internally with Pete and John, I think we've seen a little change. They both signed extensions a year ago. John's is longer than Pete's, which makes a lot of sense to me. So I think we're going to see a passing of the baton. In other words, it's been Pete's show forever, and John has kind of had to acquiesce, but they work together really good on everything. And just as a comparison, I've worked under coaches, I've worked even with coaches, and I've worked as the coach's boss. It really didn't matter to me. The dynamics were the same. We were on the same page, or we picked a different lane. And I think for the most part, the Seahawks structure has been like that, where John and Pete work good together. But I do think, Pete being 70 years old now, some of that is going to be passed on to John, and he's going to have to make some decisions on his own based on longer term planning than this year. So that dynamic, I think, is in a work in progress a little bit now, because it's shifting. Like I said, the baton has been moved. With regard to the Seahawks offense, I think has to take part of the blame for the divorce with Russell, because I don't think it was a great setup last year, whether it's Russell's injury that kept them from executing or the design of the new Shane Waldron offense. I think it wasn't what any of us wanted, including the participants. So they've got to take that to the next level, executing, planning wise, or it doesn't matter who plays quarterback, because they were bad in a lot of games, and it was like the Keystone Cops at times, and they can't have that to get out of really in the cellar now of the NFC West. So all those things, kind of a runaround, a hodgepodge of answers. I hope that kind of was what you're looking for.
Yeah, no, that was perfect, Randy. So the Russ decision, probably a mutual then between Pete and John in terms of making that trade decision?
I think it was, for sure. I don't think enough gets made of the fact that I think the respect factor for Pete, for John, for being willing to do this. We heard a lot about meetings postseason with Pete or John and ownership. And my question was, will they ask the tough questions? This tells me that they did ask tough questions, and that this was part of the plan, was everybody was okay with moving on. So I have added respect for even ownership and the people that were involved in kind of pressing Pete on this particular topic. And I think everybody was in agreement to move on. We need to do this.
Well, I appreciate it, Randy. Thanks for your time. To the 12s that read our articles, we sure appreciate you guys. I know you guys probably get frustrated with some of our rumors and trades and some of the drama with Russ, but we do our best to try to give you guys what the truth is, even when that sometimes isn't what we all want to hear. I know Randy spent a lot of time with the Seahawks. I lived in Seattle for a few years and consider that region it's a really special place. Enjoy going back there each year if I can. So we'll be doing this more often, and hopefully here in the coming days as free agency wraps up and the Seahawks are landing a bunch of great players, hopefully. So we'll be talking to everyone soon, and we'll see you guys on Heavy.